Welcome to Voice Rising with Kara Johnstad. Enjoy weekly conversations with leading luminaries, pioneering visionaries, singers, poets, musicians, and sound healers as we explore the profound role our voice plays on the path to self-realization and global enlightenment. The internationally acclaimed singer, composer, author, healer, recording artist, voice expert, creator of Voice Your Essence, and founder of the School of Voice, Kara Johnstad uses her extraordinary spiritual gifts to empower others. Everything in this world vibrates. Everything has a frequency. A pioneer in the field of voice work and transformational songwriting. Her breakthrough methods are helping thousands of people worldwide fine-tune their body-mind-spirit system and unlock the energetic frequencies of limitless creativity, health, and abundance. Share your voice, ask your questions, join in the conversation. Receive life-changing, positive transformation and rise together to create a sound world. And here's your host, Kara Johnstad.
Hi, everybody. A very warm welcome to the show today. We're talking all about sound and vibration. As you know, we live in an age of unprecedented technological and scientific progress. And we also live in an age where we seem to be bombarded with frequencies and tones and struggling with constant noises. And yet, what if we could discover how tones and frequencies can heal, how they can recharge and balance our systems? And maybe it's the sounds that we make that hold the crucial ingredient in the recipe for advancing the evolution of human health. And so today I'm very excited to have with me the acoustic physics scientist John Stuart Reid, who is on a mission to educate and inspire and excite the world in the field of visible sound and how understanding sound can empower us to lead vibrant, healthy lives. Thank you, John, so much for being with me today, and welcome to Voice Rising.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Kara. It's a great pleasure to be with you today.
Yeah, John, your work has just literally blown my mind. It's an amazing research that you do for our world. You're making important contributions, not only in the field of music medicine, but you're contributing to the paradigm shift, which is much needed. And I say this personally as a singer and someone who knows a lot about voice. There's something incredibly magical about seeing sound, seeing the beauty of the imagery that you've created over these years. So I think the ancient masters have known it, and now you are confirming this together with many scientists. Tell us about sound. Do you think it's the driving force behind creation?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, one of the mainstream theories of astrophysics is that sound was the most potent force in the early universe, far more potent than gravity. I think it was the first 370,000 years or so, according to the theory, at any rate. And this is why, when viewing the universe through a powerful telescope, Kara, we are able to see groups of galaxies in one area of the heavens, and then a huge void between another group. And when you look at all these groups, you see that basically there was an organizational principle involved. And as I say, one of these mainstream views of how that occurred was because of sound. Sound was, according to that theory, was the most potent force to organize the matter as the Big Bang was expanding. So there would be little quantum fluctuations caused by sound that then, eventually led to this situation where we have these huge voids between groups of galaxies. So, and then, of course, many of the seers of ancient cultures referred to sound as being the creative principle. One of them is the god Ptah from ancient Egypt. It comes to mind because it's a great little story, actually. I don't know if you have time, but this begins with the Princess Diana in a sense, because it was one of her ancestors who actually gave to the British Museum the Shabako stone, and this is the second most important text from all of Egypt, according to mainstream Egyptology. And on this Shabako stone, written in hieroglyphs, of course, it says this: that lo, every word of God came into being through the thoughts of the mind and the command of the tongue. And this, like I say, it's such an important text because it's showing that even in those days, thousands of years ago, these ancient people actually had insights into how creation came into being through sound. And also my own theories about how life began in the primordial oceans, Cara, it deserves a mention, I think, because without an organizing principle, the building blocks of life could never have sparked into life. You can't... I sometimes in my presentations, I give the example of a mechanical watch. If you take a mechanical watch apart, a couple of hundred parts, and you put them into a flask and you shake them around, how long would it take for those parts to come together as a working watch? Well, I think obviously the answer is never. There has to be an organizing principle. And so this is one of the big challenges in biology. How did life begin in the primordial oceans? Well, my own theory concerns sonic scaffolding. In other words, sound was the organizing principle. And if we had time, I could go into great depths to talk about this, how it was that sound sparked life in the primordial oceans. But if it's true, if my hypothesis ultimately, proves to be the theory that is accepted, then it would not be a surprise, would it, to know that sound can also heal life. If sound created life, then sound can certainly heal life.
Exactly. If sound created it, it can heal it. You are known for something called cymatics. So when one works with you or researches your name, tell us what is cymatics actually?
Well, cymatics is essentially the science of visible sound. And it goes like this, that when sound encounters a membrane, it must imprint an invisible pattern of acoustic energy on that membrane. The pattern is typically geometric in form, and it's a little bit like making a fingerprint on a surface. And in a similar way, to a fingerprint, a cymatic sound print can be made visible by sprinkling on some fine powder or by using special lighting techniques. So it's essentially the science of visible sound. And it's a science that I've been studying for, almost quarter of a century now.
And I think you've actually even had shapes of these early, amoebas or animals or sea creatures where you could really think that sound is behind creation, because when you played certain frequencies, you could see certain shapes appear that reminded you of the earliest signs of life. Is that correct?
Indeed, Cara. Indeed, because and when they occurred. By the way, we should be talking now about water as opposed to I was talking there about a fingerprint, wasn't I? And I'm saying that sprinkling on some fine powder can make that sound print visible, which is true. It is definitely true. However, it's not the way that I now make sound visible. I don't use powders anymore on plates or whatever, I'm now using pure water, only pure water. So what you're referring to there is basically that many years ago, when I first started working with water, every now and again I would see an image in the water made just purely accidentally. I would be doing some other work with some particular project, and suddenly something would appear, form would appear that strongly resembled one of the early life forms, like a trilobite, for example, or an ammonite, or one of the diatom family. They would just suddenly magically appear. And then, I would take a note of the frequencies, and in later times, I used to play about with frequencies and literally could tune in, create one of these early life forms, or let's say what appeared to be, an early life form.
Yeah.
And the more that this happened, Cara, the more of these little amazing images that appeared, the more I realized that it could not be a coincidence. If I'd only seen one or two, maybe, it could have been coincidental. But I've now seen dozens of these, what look like early life forms in the water made by pure frequencies. And this is how it came to be that I eventually developed my hypothesis. In one of the mainstream models of life, how life evolved in the primordial ocean, begins with comet seeding of the oceans. So, it's kind of, I think it's fairly well known now that comets carry, prebiotic compounds on their surface. There was that audacious European Union mission to Comet 67P. Do you remember that?
No, I don't.
They landed a craft. They had two crafts, actually. They had the Rosetta craft, talking about the ancient Egyptians here. They had the Rosetta spacecraft, and then they had the Philae lander after the Philae temple in Egypt. And this little Philae lander literally landed on the comet and sampled, using a mass spectrometer, sampled the dust on the comet, and lo and behold, they found organic compounds on the surface of this comet. I mean, that's extraordinary and audacious science, but absolutely true. And so that was the proof, basically. Many other people had, suggested this across the last 50 years at least. Fred Hoyle was one of the scientists, very famous scientist, who suggested that the Earth had been seeded from space, by organic compounds on comets and so on. Anyway, here was the proof, with Comet 67P, that this was absolutely the case. Having said that, if you provide all of these organic compounds created in space into the Earth's oceans, how are they ever going to spark life? How are you going to, what is the organizing principle that brings them together and literally sparks life? And so my theory is all based around cymatics, because, I think there's, again, not much doubt that life began around hydrothermal vents. This is, one of the mainstream biology theories, that hydrothermal vents are places where obviously there's warmth, for one thing. There's also sound in the form of the jostling of the bubbles coming up from the core of the Earth. And this is where my theory, or hypothesis, let's call it, comes into being, because when you have a melee of sound, it's kind of like a white noise roar of sound created by all of these jostling bubbles, then there has to be cymatic patterns created on the surface of these bubbles. Now, the patterns would be invisible. You would not be able to see them. Even if you went today, with a scuba set and went down to see these bubbles, Cara, you wouldn't see any patterns. But the patterns are there. You need special lighting to be able to actually see these patterns. And the point is that the patterns that form particularly on microscopic bubbles as they're coming up out of these hydrothermal vents, they have areas on their surface called nodes and antinodes. Now, the antinodes are areas of maximal pressure. So the ingredients that have been into this ocean of pre-organic compounds, those ingredients would never be able to go onto that area of the bubble. But in the nodal areas of the bubble, that's where these ingredients find safe haven. They can literally attach themselves to the surface of the bubble in the nodal areas. and form a kind of what I call sonic scaffolding. And that's the basic aspect of this hypothesis, is that the sonic scaffolding is a consequence of sound in the primordial oceans. That's what, in my belief, is what sparked life.
It is so fascinating. Also, that we know we are stardust. I mean, we know that we have so much water in our body, oceanic fluid, and we have all the minerals and everything from the beyond. John, we're going to take a very, very short break and then come back with more about sound, more about cymatics.
The cutting edge of conscious radio. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
OMTimes magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organisation, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Connect at omtimes.com. OMTimes, creating a more conscious lifestyle.
With happy clients all over the world, Cara Johnstad knows that your voice is the missing link to more authenticity, abundance, creativity, and health. An internationally acclaimed voice expert, Cara's breakthrough methods have helped thousands of people successfully heal their voice wounds and extinguish the story of self-doubt and shyness forever. Join in group trainings, attend online sessions, schedule one-on-one time, and invite Cara to work with your organization and community. Get started today. Go to www.carajohnstad.com and receive a special guided meditation designed to fine-tune your inner voice and welcome you on the voice journey.
This is Kathy Beal, host of Celestial Compass, featuring astrology you can use. Celestial Compass points you to what's going on in the sky and what you can do with it down here on Earth. We also explore fun, effective, and cosmic tools for navigating this adventure we call life. Join me the first and third Monday of the month at 5 p.m. Eastern Time for Celestial Compass. It's enlightening, entertaining, and empowering.
If I could be you,
and you could be me, for just 1 hour,
if you could find a way
to get inside
each other's mind,
walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out, and for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Welcome back to Voice Rising. I am your host, Cara Johnstad, and with me today is John Stuart Reid. We are deepening the conversation on sound consciousness, cymatics, and our voice's ability to heal and transform our world. John, you've done a lot of studies about voice in all your work as a researcher, and we know that the human voice is rich and has many, many harmonics. It is really nurturing trillions of cells within our body. And what is even fascinating for me is, well, it's not only connecting us with our own healing systems and our own body, but it is entering millions of bodies, bodies of water. It is entering people. I always say, as a singer, I am literally able in a concert with 10,000 people to enter each body. I can go into the heart. I can go into the belly buttons. You know, my voice lands, and then the people walk home and they take me with them. You know, it's phenomenal, right? So what have you discovered about the voice, our voice?
Gosh, Cara, how long is your show?
Well, give us a few. You know, that I think that is what I've worked on, so many different levels, from the inner voice work and intent and this power of sound within the words, little sound bites that create words and programming and all this stuff. But I tell you, when I first started seeing is believing, I guess, seeing all these beautiful patterns. I mean, of course, we know that a singer's voice or a motivational speaker or somebody can touch us, a mother singing a lullaby. But when you start seeing all the patterning, you realize that there's such a responsibility that we have to each other, because every time we speak and sing, we are literally, shape-shifting the world. We are literally creating our reality.
We are indeed.
I find this always profound. So, what are some of your secrets you've discovered?
Oh, I wouldn't call them secrets. They certainly, I've spoke about the voice in many different presentations, but I can certainly give you, and your listeners, a kind of overview of some of the discoveries that I've made. I think the first one that's perhaps the most important to understand is that the sounds that emit from our mouths and indeed from our noses are bubble-shaped. I know we have this, we seem to be stuck with this term sound waves, so most people visualize waves wiggling their way through the air, coming out of our mouths or noses. And of course, this is not the reality. Basically, all of the sounds that have ever come out of your mouth and nose are bubble-shaped emanations. And these bubble-shaped emanations are rhythmically pulsating in and out. And it's these in and out pulsations which are, in fact, the sound. They are the sound vibrations as the bubble is expanding rapidly, of course, at the speed of sound. At the same time, it is pulsating in and out as those pulsations, which, when they are graphed and seen on something, like, say, an oscilloscope or some other instrument that shows the graphic aspect of sound, then yes, of course, they look like waves because that's a graph. But of course, nature does not use graphs, right? Nature it just doesn't use graphs. So basically, all of these sounds are that are being created by our voice, by our song, are all bubble-shaped. And the other aspect to this that you're mentioning about, or inferring that your voice is imprinting onto others, and indeed it is. And what happens is, as the sounds from your voice radiate out in this spherical bubble-like way, they then encounter other people, they encounter bodies, and when they literally move into the body, they end up being wrapped around in a spherical manner. Every cell in their body is receiving the vibrations from your voice. And these patterns that are manifesting on the surface membranes of the cells and other people, of course, and in your own body, they have many healing aspects to them, and we could certainly, it's one of the subjects that we could be talking about. But one of the other important aspects to voice is that it has an infrared component, and again, this is not generally known. And how this, where the reality of this comes from, at the atomic scale, when sound is created, it's literally the bumping together of atomic particles, whether these be atoms or molecules. And as they collide with each other, so they pass on the vibrations from, like a set of dominoes, from one atom to the next or one molecule to the next. But what happens, Cara, is at the moment of collision between any two atomic particles, something kind of magical happens. And it's this, that every atom or every molecule has surrounding it a magnetic field. This is called, in science, it's called the magnetic moment of the atom or the molecule. And when these magnetic fields collide, in science, it's called an inelastic collision. An inelastic collision. And in every inelastic collision, there has to be a release of energy. And this energy, we know about this energy on a day-to-day basis. Like, for example, if you rub your hands together very, very vigorously, you will feel warmth, right? Well, that warmth is occurring because all the trillions of molecules in the proteins of one hand are slipping past all the trillions of molecules in the proteins of your other hand. What's really happening, though, at the atomic level, it's the magnetic fields around these atoms that are slipping past each other. And all of those collisions create this infrared light. Well, exactly the same thing is happening when you sing or when you speak, right? The molecules are being jostled. They're emitting from your mouth as a bubble-shaped emanation, as I say. But at the same time, all of these molecules and atoms that are having these inelastic collisions are also creating an infrared bubble. And this infrared bubble is being modulated in frequency and amplitude by the frequencies in your voice. What this means, right, is that if you were to go outside, Cara, and sing to the sky, right, your voice would probably, maybe could be heard about a mile, a couple of kilometers away at very best, right? Eventually it just goes into noise. You just can't carry that far. However, the infrared component of your voice will go out as a bubble in all directions, way off to the horizon and way up into space. And when it reaches the boundary of space, of course, it will literally keep going forever unless it meets, some dense matter in space, which is, there's not a lot of that. So essentially, when you sing to the sky, your song will literally one day reach the stars. Obviously, it'll be very weak energy by that time, but still, if there was some alien civilization with a very, very sensitive telescope, a bit like the James Webb telescope, but perhaps, greater sensitivity even than that, then your song would be picked up eventually, on some distant planet where there's an alien civilization. So it's pretty exciting, to think.
It is so exciting. It's like really fly me to the moon, right? And it's beyond exciting. I mean, what do you think, John? I've always said this, that sound is more powerful than light. I'm so sassy. Everyone's seeking light. And I always said my unscientific theory is that when I'm sitting in this apartment in Berlin, and if I turn off the light in my studio, the person in the bedroom, if they have a closed door, they cannot see that I turned off the light, right? Yeah. But if I'm singing and I stop singing, they can immediately sense it. So singing penetrates walls, these big thick walls, whereas light actually does not. So this gives me, so this is always, like I always say, this is to prove that sound penetrates so deeply. And now you're saying if we go outside, we can even sing to the stars. And we know as poets and singers that the stars are singing always to us. I mean, I think that people that are singers and musicians and artists and poets, or maybe even gardeners, they feel the frequencies of stars and the moon
indeed,
singing to us.
Sing to us. They do, Cara. There's a science called asteroseismology. So it's a branch of astrophysics. So asteroseismology, and basically, an asteroseismology listens in to the sounds created in stars, not, of course, as sound, because sound can't travel through the vacuum of space, right? But what can travel through the vacuum of space are these modulations of the light. It's exactly as I've just been describing, in the reverse, as it were. But here we're talking about stars that, of course, are very noisy places. In the furnace of the stars, a lot of noise. And that all those frequencies in the star actually modulate in a tiny way the light of the star. So then when the star light is picked up by a powerful telescope and then that light is demodulated. In other words, they are retrieving the sounds that were occurring in the star. So this is it's a very well-known science of astroseismology. But the other aspect to song and a voice in general, which I think is very important to mention here, is that whenever we make sound, obviously all sounds that we make originate as a thought, right? First you have to have the thought to create the sound. And those thoughts actually are, the brain is speaking constantly to the heart, and vice versa, of course. The heart is speaking to the brain all of the time. Messages are literally thousands of messages going backwards and forwards between the heart and the brain constantly. But these thoughts that we have, that we're just about to make say a word or hold an intention, that thought immediately modulates our heart field. And the heart field, you probably know, it's quite a powerful electromagnetic field, actually, and could be measured, a long way away from a person with sensitive instrumentation. Mm-hmm. The point I'm going to make here, though, is that if we hold a thought or an intention, and we say we're just about to sing, then that thought or that intention modulates the heart field. The heart, which is quite a powerful electromagnetic energy generator, then modulates the Earth's magnetic field, which is essentially a static field, right? Mm-hmm, but that static field becomes modulated by our own heart, essentially. So what we're doing is we are transmitting our thoughts, our intentions, or our song, for that matter, out into the world via what I like to think of as the magnetic internet. It's a way for our hearts to send signals across huge distances. And this is why I believe that the power of intention, for example, in prayer, or just not necessarily from prayer, but just holding a thought, a powerful intention for some outcome, is why it can affect so many people across huge distances. I believe it is because of this mechanism where our heart literally modulates the Earth's magnetic field.
And heart, if we take the H from the front and put it on the back, we do have Earth. It's the same sound, right? Heart, Earth, hearth.
That's right.
It's the same, right? And I always say, why is the voice placed? I mean, it's not placed where our little finger is, or it has a function which is to integrate all these emotional waves together with our mind's eye, or together with our intentions and our thoughts and our beliefs, and it's mind-blowing. And there's also you've done a lot of studies on this, there's also a wandering nerve, which singers call the soul nerve, and we are learning more about what we call the vagus nerve. And what have you discovered about the importance of the vagus nerve in creating harmony?
Oh gosh, Cara, the vagus nerve is so important in the body. And, talking about where the voice is, which is located in a kind of, well, obviously in our neck, which is a bridge, isn't it, between
it's a bridge.
the brain and the body. It's in that bridge location. And what happens is that the vagus nerve is the longest nerve in the body, and it innervates almost all of the body's organs. It begins in the brain stem, and the first place it goes to after leaving the brain stem are our left and right ears, our cochlea, and literally it terminates in the tragus of the ear, this little flap of tissue that overhangs our auditory canal. That's where it literally terminates, and that's why that little flap of tissue is so incredibly sensitive to the touch. And then from the tragus, the next place it goes to is the voice. that goes to the pharynx and the larynx. So this is wonderful, isn't it? Because when we know that the vagus nerve has so many healing properties in the body, like, for example, if we stimulate the vagus nerve, we can drastically reduce any chronic inflammation that we have in our bodies. And I think, it's pretty common knowledge these days that chronic inflammation, well, it's a major social problem, actually, in the world. And yet, mainstream medicine, unfortunately, has very little to offer, in their toolbox to help people with chronic inflammation. And yet here we have a tool immediately available that we're carrying around with us, in the form of our own voice, that can beautifully stimulate the vagus nerve simply through making sounds. And we don't have to be a singer. I mean, not everyone can sing well, but making any sound actually is sufficient to stimulate the vagus nerve. Even humming, will everyone can hum, right? So even humming can stimulate the vagus nerve. But the vagus nerve has many other properties as well. For example, it slows the rate of aging. Now, how wonderful is that? I think everyone wants to live longer, right?
Yes.
And it also enhances sexual function. It has a whole host of different beautiful benefits, actually, simply by stimulating the vagus nerve. So if we can do that either by singing or humming. The other way to do it is by listening to beautiful music, for example, through good quality headphones. And I use this term headphone because, rather than speakers, for example, because although listening to music through speakers has its own series of benefits, if we experience music through good quality headphones, then we do get this wonderful stimulation of the tragus of the vagus, that then stimulates the vagus nerve. And so these headphones that I'm talking about, they have to be able to have a frequency response that goes way down to 5 hertz. And, there are quite a lot of headphones available today that can do that. And the reason for this, 5 hertz, is because of another discovery that I've made, and not all that long ago, actually, Cara, which is that many albums of music are actually creating these very low frequencies through something that's called heterodyning. This is mixing of frequencies. So the frequencies are not in the original singer's voice. No one can sing down to 5 hertz. But because of the mixing that goes on in many albums, then many albums do indeed create these very low frequencies. And it's these very low frequencies that have been found not through my own research, but the research of others, that's showing that these are the optimal frequencies for vagus nerve stimulation. So listening through good quality headphones to beautiful music will stimulate your vagus nerve, will reduce chronic inflammation in your body, will slow the rate that you age, will improve your sexual function, among a whole host of other benefits. So, it's pretty good news.
It's good news. John, we're going to take a very, very short break, and then we're going to be right back with more of this very fascinating talk.
Bringing a more conscious lifestyle to your world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
You came across someone struggling with hunger. How would you recognize them? Would you notice an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for summer break
because she may not be having lunch again until September?
Or a war veteran who's having a hard time landing a job and getting back on his feet? I am the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger. I am hunger in America.
Hunger can be hard to recognize. Learn why at IamHungerInAmerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to Voice Rising. I'm your host, Cara Johnstad, and with me today is John Stuart Reid, and we are deepening the conversation on sound consciousness and our voice's ability to heal and transform our world. John, I am, you never cease to amaze me. I could listen to you for a good night story every night. I think it's just beyond, it doesn't matter if it's the vagus nerve, if it's longevity, if it's dolphin talk, if it's the stars singing. You are so inspirational to really turn us on to something that I think everybody knows instinctively. We know that we want to read stories to our children. We want to sing lullabies. We talk about being of sound mind, making sound decisions. We talk about, have arrived safe and sound at your end destination. It sounds good. We have this feeling that sound is integral to our well-being, and yet it is through this work that you're doing. Sometimes we just need to see it. It's that simple. We need to understand the beauty of it, just like a beautiful painting. So tell me, what are the most exciting research projects that you're currently working on?
Well, and thank you for your great kindness, Cara. That's really beautiful what you're saying. My work in this area began 25 years ago now in the Great Pyramid of Egypt. And that's really what, inspired my work across this 2.5 decades, actually, since then. So the essential ingredients, I'm not going to go into the details of that experience that I had in the Great Pyramid, excepting to say that there was an experiment using cymatics to make visible the resonances in the sarcophagus in the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid. It was a hugely successful experiment. And what came out of it was two things. First of all, that my lower back was healed within 20 minutes of making sound in the king's chamber. I had actually injured my back 3 weeks earlier, and then going into the king's chamber with up to the eyes in analgesics, I've been popping M&Ms, painkillers like M&Ms really, but nothing had touched the pain. And yet within 20 minutes of making sound in the king's chamber, all of that pain left me and it never came back. So that obviously inspired me to understand what are the biological mechanisms by which sound can literally turn pain off within 20 minutes completely. In fact, more than that, actually healed me completely. And then the other aspect to it was that the cymatics experiment had been so phenomenally successful. That said to me that this could be a new tool for science, and indeed that's what happened across all of these years. Two things. First of all, the cymoscope instrument is now available. It's a new type of instrument that makes sound visible. And then the other aspect to it is I needed to understand how I had been healed within 20 minutes, and that set me on this road that I'm still on today, in which sound therapy and music medicine is becoming more and more important in our world. So asking about, specific research that I'm engaged in right now, and what's, I consider to be perhaps the most important, is my work with music and blood. So I had a hunch a few years ago that perhaps music may extend the lifespan of any cell. So this was just a pure intuitive hunch, Cara, and I decided to explore it using human blood because blood is readily available. You know, we can order it from a blood bank. And what happens is I designed this very simple experiment that turned out to have amazing implications for medical science. And so, in essence, what happens is we take a vial of blood, literally whole human blood, excuse me, and we decant it into two smaller test tubes. One test tube, this is after warming it up, by the way, to normal blood temperature. One test tube goes into our Faraday cage, which is an electromagnetically screened cage. It's like a small room, basically, but no electromagnetism can get into that room. It's also very, very quiet in there. It's a little bit like an anechoic chamber, not quite as quiet as an anechoic chamber, but almost. It's very, very quiet. And then the other vial goes into another incubator in the main body of the lab, and in this incubator we have a small speaker. So now we can play music to that vial of blood. And so this was a collaboration with Professor G from Rutgers University. He came here. We worked together for several days designing the protocol. And essentially, all we're doing is exposing the blood to the music for 20 minutes, while the other vial, the control vial, is in another incubator in a very, very quiet environment and electromagnetically screened environment, right? Then we test the numbers of red blood cells in both test tubes. And the results were absolutely, well, they were astonishing. We could hardly believe them ourselves, but of course we did multiple tests with multiple genres of music, all sorts of different types of music, and not only at 440 concert pitch, but also 432 concert pitch and 444 concert pitch. So we really did a very thorough job in exploring the results of music in relation to blood. And what we found, Cara, in every single case, there were huge numbers more viable red blood cells in the music incubator than in the quiet incubator, right? And so we started looking for a mechanism. Why is this? What is the underlying biological mechanism? And to cut a long story short, the mechanism is basically oxygen. And the way it works is this, that in blood, when we receive blood from a blood bank, or whether in our own bodies, it's the same situation, blood always contains a huge amount of dissolved oxygen. This is oxygen that's come obviously through our normal respiration in the first instance, right? Comes through our, through our lungs, and eventually ends up in our bloodstream as dissolved oxygen. Well, it turns out that this dissolved oxygen in the blood is not available to the hemoglobin molecules in the red blood cells unless there is some pressure present. So when we get this blood from the blood bank, Cara, it's very, very dark red, okay? It's really dark red. And yet, all of that oxygen is still in the blood, but it's not being uptaken, it's not bound to the hemoglobin, only because there's no pressure pulse. Well, in the body, in a circulatory system of a living person, that pressure pulse comes from the heart, of course. So every time there's a heartbeat, that is the low-frequency sound that then causes the dissolved oxygen to be bound to the hemoglobin. And this is how we live. We live because we need oxygen all of the time. Every breath we take causes more dissolved oxygen to enter into our bloodstream. And that is uptaken, that oxygen is uptaken by the red blood cells every time there is a pressure pulse. And you know what happens if there's no pressure pulse, if there's no heart? basically you would lose consciousness within seconds, even though at that point your brain is still engorged with dissolved oxygen. There's still masses of oxygen in your brain, but it's not available suddenly because suddenly your heart has stopped, right? And this is why no heartbeat, no sound, therefore no consciousness. You would literally pass out within seconds. So essentially, the mechanism that we were using here, unwittingly, it has to be said, but we were exposing the music to low-frequency sounds from this speaker, and the pressure of those low-frequency frequencies was causing the old red blood cells. These are they're not via. In a test tube of blood, I need to back up a little bit here and just say that in any test tube of human blood, there will always be millions of viable red blood cells, and there will always be millions that are already dead, and there will be many, many more millions that are classed as medically old. And it's these medically old red blood cells that we were really focused on, because those old red blood cells are beginning to lose their outer membrane integrity. They're starting to break up, and eventually in the body they will be mopped up, and replaced with brand new red blood cells, right? But in our test tube environment here, what was happening was the outer membranes of these old red blood cells was being repaired within 20 minutes. Can you imagine? Just 20 minutes of more oxygen availability to these red blood cells because of the music was repairing the old red blood cells and making them new again. So when we then do the count with the cell counter, it's an automatic cell counter, we find that there are millions and millions of more viable red blood cells than from the quiet environment. And this was an astonishing result. And then, to take this work further, Cara, what we are now engaged in, or just about to actually this summer, is to begin working with white blood cells. And the inspiration for this actually came from other researchers who have found that whole body vibration, in this case they were using a mice model, but they found that a whole body vibration of these mice was increasing their leukocyte numbers, or macrophages rather it was actually, increasing their macrophage numbers, which are a type of white blood cell, off the charts just by, again, immersion in low-frequency sound. So what we are thinking is that if we got this amazing effect from music and the red blood cells, what if we're going to find something very similar with the white blood cells? In other words, immersing ourselves in music could boost our immune system massively. Well, we already know that it can in other mechanisms in the body, that music does boost the immune system through dopamine release, for example. That boosts our immune system. But now we're looking at this other potential mechanism where music, the pressure from music frequencies will literally perhaps power the proliferation of white blood cells, and that would be a wonderful day if that turns out to be true.
John, you're doing profound work for our world. We know now that we can heal within 20 minutes. I hope this creates a voice revolution and that we all start creating beautiful music. I thank you so